In early 2014, I was invited to breakfast by Neil Barsky, a journalist turned investor turned philanthropist who had an audacious proposition. At a time when news outlets were struggling to stay afloat, Neil planned to start a new one, a nonprofit newsroom focused on our broken criminal justice system. The Marshall Project, which he named for the civil rights giant and Supreme Court Justice Thurgood Marshall, would assemble an independent team of reporters and editors to investigate the causes and consequences of mass incarceration. To maximize its impact, it would share the work with other news organizations. He was looking for an editor-in-chief. I'd spent 30 years at the New York Times as a correspondent, editor, and, most recently, op-ed columnist, but had never covered criminal justice, unless you count a few months long ago on the night cops beat for the Oregonian. So, before accepting Neil's offer, I did a little reporting, which marked the beginning of an education that continues to this day. My crash course in criminal justice taught me that this country imprisons people more copiously than almost any other place on earth. Some countries, notably including China and North Korea, do not fully disclose their prison populations, so America may not actually hold the dubious distinction of first place. But there is ample justification for calling what we do in America mass incarceration. Our incarceration rate per 100,000 population, which includes adults serving time in state and federal prisons and those awaiting trial or doing short time in county jails, is roughly twice that of Russia's and Iran's, 4 times that of Mexico's, 5 times England's, 6 times Canada's, 9 times Germany's, and 17 times Japan's. Our captive population is disproportionately black and brown. Much of the public debate was focused on the mass in mass incarceration, a growing consensus that we lock up too many people for too long. There was also considerable agreement on how to reduce the incarcerated population, if we can muster the political will. We can make some relatively minor crimes, starting with low-level drug offenses, non-crimes. We can divert people to mental health and addiction programs, or probation, or community service. We can abolish mandatory minimum sentences and encourage prosecutors and judges to apply the least severe punishment appropriate under the circumstances. We can raise the age at which accused youngsters are subject to adult punishment. We can give compassionate release to old and infirm inmates who are unlikely to pose a danger. We can reduce the use of cash bail, which traps the poor in the modern equivalent of debtor's prison. In fact, the incarcerated population in this country has been in a gradual but steady decline since a peak in 2008, from 2.3 million to 1.8 million in 2020, according to data compiled by the Vera Institute of Justice. That includes an unprecedented 14% drop in 2020, attributed in part to early releases in lockdown courts during the coronavirus pandemic. States have demonstrated that they can cut prison populations without jeopardizing safety. In the decade ending in 2017, 34 states, red and blue, simultaneously reduced incarceration and crime rates. Addressing the mass could also mean prisoners left behind would be less subject to overcrowding, which contributes to explosive violence and, as the 2020 plague year demonstrated, leaves prisons more vulnerable to rampant contagion. This book examines the incarceration part of mass incarceration. Our prisons are not the most transparent institutions, and out of sight too often means out of mind. But the American way of incarceration is a shameful waste of lives and money, feeding a pathological cycle of poverty, community dysfunction, crime, and hopelessness. What is the alternative? Can we use our prisons to improve the chances that those caught in the criminal justice system emerge, and upward of 95% of them will emerge, with some hope of productive lives?